Hello, 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 and welcome to Unmute Now, the podcast that raises the volume on the whispered community conversations. Today, I am your lead host, Yolande Robertson Green, and I'm going to bring in our three fabulous ladies, my co-hosts, without any further ado. Raquel, are you there?
I am. Hello, everybody.
And Natasha.
Hello.
And Angela, hi.
Hi, everyone.
So that's us. Today, ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us for the very first time, you're welcome. If you're a regular, thank you for staying with us. It's going to be a topic that is very, in my opinion, could be very sensitive, but it's a topic that really requires attention. I'm going to bring in the guests that we have a little bit later, but I just want to set a bit of context. For those of you who would have been following us, you would have remembered early up in season 1, we would have looked at gender-based violence and a look at South Africa and what the situation is in South Africa. If you're in the United Kingdom, very recently, I'm sure your attention would have been drawn to the recent protests regarding or surrounding the death of Sarah Everett and the fact that a police constable is awaiting trial for her murder. Today, we're going to take it a bit closer to home, literally. And what that means is that today we're going to be looking at domestic violence. So I'm going to bring our guests in now before we get into the crux of the conversation. And before I do that, I want you to like, subscribe, and follow us. So I'm going to bring our guests in now, and we have from the World Council of Churches joining the discussion today, we have Nicole Ashwood, Reverend Nikki.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And you're happy with us referring to you as Reverend Nikki?
Yes, I'm fine. I answer to anything except hear you.
That's a good way to start. And we have from Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid joining us, Rebecca Grounds. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
You're very welcome. And we're going to also have, you won't be able to see her. She's going to be sharing her story and is going to be referred to by the name Precious. In today's episode, we're going to have a survivor of domestic violence joining the discussion and sharing her story. Precious, welcome. Say hello.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Hi, Precious.
Thanks for joining us, Precious.
Welcome.
Ladies, so we're going to get right into it. And before we get into the real discussion, I'm just going to ask our guests, beginning with Reverend Nikki, to tell us a bit about the work you do and a bit about yourself.
So hi, I'm Reverend Nicole Ashwood with the World Council of Churches. I am the program executive for the Just Community of Women and Men. And all of that sentence means that I work with gender issues, in particular with sexual and gender-based violence. As you can see from my background, one of our flagship programs is the Thursdays in Black campaign to end rape and violence. Thank you for having me.
That's good. We'll talk a bit more about that Thursdays in Black in a minute or two. And Rebecca.
Sure. So I work for Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. I've been with the organisation about 8-9 years now. I've had a number of different roles. I've worked with in refuge with women and children who have experienced domestic abuse and domestic violence. And I've also worked with, we support female victims of human trafficking in Northern Ireland. So I've also worked with women who have been sexually exploited or experienced modern slavery in Northern Ireland.
Brilliant.
Right, I'm not sure we're going to put Precious on the spot to tell us anything about herself other than she is a survivor of domestic violence and happy to share her story as we go along. So I'm just going to start and I'm going to pose the question to perhaps both Nikki and Rebecca. I know that the work you do is specifically linking in with women. And so how do you feel in general that a woman facing domestic violence could be helped?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important that every woman knows that there is help available. I met with a woman just earlier this week, and that was the kind of, it was my first meeting with her, and it was the one thing I wanted to get across was that actually, you know, that you do have rights. You do have the right to be safe, and that there are options available. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean leaving your home, but there are safe places to go if that's what needs to happen to stay safe. And also that it's not the woman's fault. Abuse is never her fault. No matter what the perpetrator has said, that it is not, the abuse is not the woman's fault. And I think those are the most important things that women who are experiencing domestic abuse should know.
I so agree with you, Rebecca. That has been the case from my experience in the Caribbean and coming here to the World Council of Churches in Geneva. Additionally, I think it's also important to help women to be able to find their own strength on the inside, because sometimes the difference between being trapped in a situation of abuse and being able to step out of that situation is knowing that I can do it and I have support if and when I am ready to do it. Another issue that I have faced over the years of working with women is that some women are told off because they don't feel ready to leave. And I think it is also important for us to say, look, we're with you on this journey and we're with you whenever you are ready.
Absolutely.
Rebecca, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to go along with that, I mean, some of the statistics that we know that it's, you know, on average, a woman is assaulted 33 times before she asks for help.
Wow.
And that on average, it takes a woman 7 times where she tries to leave a relationship before she actually makes that final break. So just what you said, Reverend Nikki, that, you know, that a woman may not be ready, you know, when she first discloses what's going on, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's ready to leave the relationship. But as you say, that there is help and support available no matter where she is in her journey.
Precious, how do you feel? Would you, yeah, I was just going to ask the same.
How do I feel about, I think that's a vague kind of question. How do I feel?
No, it was just to ask you the same, to answer the same question, as in, how can a woman facing domestic violence be helped?
I think there is help out there, but there are some big buts, because I can only speak for myself. I had a long history of DV, and I think you know, the help that is out there, it's kind of limited, and because of the way how the system is set up, you know, I've lived in a refuge 3 times, so you know, you go in and you get the help, and they put you in a system where you can't afford to live. So I went back to my situation, which was really sad, because and then for me, and I really have to be careful how I speak, because the church didn't help me. I grew up in church, and you know, I went to the pastors several times, and you know, they would always say, you know, let us pray. I mean, I had a broken arm. I ended up in hospital, stitches in my side, stuff like that. And it was just the worst. It's like you tell them that you're going through these things, and you know, and I wasn't on the peripherals of the church. I was a worker in the church, and you know, they really don't want to talk about it, and I still don't think that the church is ready for dealing with this kind of situations. But I can only talk about myself and from what I've seen. So there is a lot of work to be done. I think the church has failed many people, and I'm not saying that because I'm angry. I'm saying that because it is the truth. And for some people, they don't, because when you're going through domestic violence, it's one of the hardest thing to get up and run, especially when you have children. And when your children haven't seen it and you can't tell them what you're going through, they love their father, they, you know, they adore their parents. And you turn to the system and the system fails you, it really is an awful place. And I must say that, you know, this is one of the reasons why I don't want to be identified, because I see myself more than a survivor. I am a very strong person. I've got a career. Actually, I have several careers. And a lot of people, I went through my studies, a lot of my studies when I was going through these things. So I turned my pain into making myself trying to, you know, get an education. And I remember when I was in the refuge and they referred me to counseling, and I was in the refuge at one point, they said, you know, actually in the 3 places I went, they said, you know, you don't belong here. You know, they all told me that you deserve better than this. So so it's like I said, it's a large question. So, but I hope I've answered what you're asking me.
Right. I'm going to bring Raquel or probably one of the other ladies back in, but I want to give Nikki or perhaps Rebecca a chance to respond briefly. And just, we talked about systems. We're probably going to refer maybe to the role of the police when we come back, but I'm going to give Nikki and Rebecca a quick chance here to respond.
Precious, let me start by apologizing to you on behalf of us, failed human church leaders. I wish that I could say that every church leader has come on board since we've started. No, we haven't. And unfortunately, sometimes the people who are committing the acts of violence are us church folk. So I'm sorry. I really am sorry.
I really, you know, and I can understand. I really appreciate that. And you are so right. The first person who was very horrible to me, who physically mocked me, was a pastor's son. And when I went to his parents, because I can tell you that they were one of the founding fathers of the Black church in London, where I lived at the time. And they dare not, they actually, when I told his mother, she called him and said, you know, she called him by his name and she said, you know, your wife said this, but I know you'd never do anything like that. And I lived under that banner for 10 years, you know, so I can understand, you know, why you'd want to apologize now, but I'm sure you can appreciate that the church on a whole is not ready for this and so many other issues. And I am going to say again that I'm not angry. I'm just stating the facts based on experiences from what I've been through and from what I've seen in other people go through as well.
Absolutely. Rebecca?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Precious, I think you're right. There's still so much work to be done around this. There are still so many stigmas and stereotypes of what domestic abuse looks like, and what, you know, what a victim or survivor looks like, what a perpetrator looks like. And I think that there is still a lot of work to be done to highlight the fact that, you know, it can be people in high positions, whether that's in the church, whether that's in the medical field, whether that's in politics, you know, and that, you know, that their behavior is abuse just as the same if it was Joe Bloggs off the street. And I think that there's still so much work that needs to be done around, you know, highlighting that any woman can be a victim of domestic abuse, you know, no matter their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their socioeconomic status, that, you know, that this is an issue that is, it used to be referred to as, if it was an illness, it would be a pandemic. And I think now that we have been living through a pandemic, we can actually look and go, oh my goodness, you know, if 1 in 4 women are affected by domestic abuse at some point in their lifetime, and yet we still, you know, there's still so much stigma and stereotypes that exist, and there's so much work to be done to challenge that, so that when a woman does come forward and say, this is what is happening to me, that she has an appropriate response. And that's what I think is, I'm so sorry, Precious, because I think that is when somebody is brave enough to come up and say, look, this is what has happened to me, this is what is happening to me, that there should be the system should be working. It shouldn't have failed you. And I know that, even within my own work that, we fight with the system sometimes, that we have to fight to get women support, whether that's financial or legal, but that it is that, we can improve the system and we need to keep working towards that.
Yes, very much so.
I'm going to give Angela a chance to ask a quick question here, but dare I say, without minimizing Precious's experience, dare I say, in my own experience with family members, without being too specific, I know that quite a few of my family members have sought refuge in the church, and that has been sufficient for them. Everybody is different, and for them, prayer was enough. So that is, I know, in some respects, paying, homage to the church and the role that they have played in many, many lives. Angela, to you?
Yeah, I'm really interested in that aspect, just because I think from my perspective as a pastor in the church, understanding that the church had a journey to go through, and I think it's the same with every institution on this issue and many other issues, have had a journey to go through, and some churches unfortunately haven't started that journey. Some are a lot further on, and I think maybe Reverend Nikki would be able to give us a little bit more in terms of, just a bit later, in terms of practical things that are being done within the church body to address that. But I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Precious, if I may, and I'm coming from a background of somebody who, as a young child, witnessed domestic violence for many years. So I have my own experience of it from that observance point of view. And I know that you said that the church didn't help you, but I just wondered, how did you find help? Where did you find help, and how did you start that journey? You through?
Thank you, Angela. So because the church failed me, I started to do some research. I, just ask around. I asked as if I was asking for a friend and someone. And then at the time, I think I remembered my daughter was a little baby, and the health visitor noticed how unhappy I was. And because I was incapacitated after I had her, and she noticed how unhappy I was, and she said, if you ever need help, if there's anything going on, just come and see me. And I one day I just stole away. I said I was going to the shop, and I popped in to see her, and she told me about Women's Aid, and they helped me at first. But it was good and it was sad because, I grew up in the Caribbean, and I came to the UK, and I didn't know about the benefit system. And so they put me in private housing and, all the stuff, really tried to help me. But because I became stuck, I couldn't afford to live in that place anymore. I didn't have enough money to survive. I had to go back to my ex. I went back to the situation, and 2 days after I went back, I ended up in hospital needing 6 stitches in my hip. So I went back to Women's Aid, and they did help me, so yeah. If the church had helped me, because that is what I grew up, the church is a community. I really wanted them to help me, but if they had helped me, then I wouldn't have had to turn to Women's Aid. But this is what I'm saying. It's a topic that for some church leaders, they will discuss and they will help. But I believe that the church is a community, and it's doing what the Bible says, because to me, Jesus is an action man. They should do much more to help their role. I believe that the church does more, especially the Black churches, where a lot of us grew up in church. People would feel more secure turning to them rather than assisting that you don't know how it's going to help you. But like I said, here I am, because Northern Ireland saved me for sure the third time round, so.
That's good to know eventually that you found a place where you felt safe enough and that you could progress in your own life. I know that the system, we keep referring to it broadly, the system in terms of where people can get help is so wide. We're probably not going to touch on all of those different areas today. It's probably the church and Women's Aid under the microscope, but we know that there are many other agencies out there. Natasha, Raquel, I'm going to bring you both in here with your questions. I'm going to start off with you, Raquel, because I think you had a follow-up question from earlier.
Yes, actually, I was thinking about what Rebecca said about how Women's Aid is able to help children, and then also picking up on what Angela said about having been a witness to the domestic violence taking place. I think you mentioned that as well, Yolande. And Precious talked about her children, you know, in the mix. And I'm just interested to know what help is actually available for children.
Absolutely. I mean, there are, within Women's Aid, we have specialist workers that work directly with children. So whether that's in the refuge, as I said, we have specialist workers, but we also have specialist workers that work with children in the community, from the workers in the community from the age of 4. In terms of in refuge, you know, we have babies that are born and come in directly from hospital into the refuge, and our workers will work with them. We know that domestic abuse has an enormous impact, you know, on children, but that children are also very resilient, and that with support, you know, they can overcome the trauma that they have suffered. So we have specialist programs. One of them is called Helping Hands, where we look at children, helping them build up their resilience, helping them to identify people in their lives who are safe people that they can talk to. Helping Hands is also done in schools across Northern Ireland. And that is a really, really great program, you know, because again, it's not just a certain type of child or a certain type of family that experiences domestic violence, that this happens to so many of our children and women. So, you know, and then there's also Bernardo's does a lot of great work as well with children who've experienced trauma. And then, of course, you know, the NSPCC. So there's lots of organizations that do help children. And like I said, that, you know, within Women's Aid, we're very much tailored to the individual, either woman or child, you know, looking at that child or woman's needs and assessing what is it that she needs right now, what support can we give her, and how can we help her, as you said, you know, I think somebody said before about empowering her, because domestic violence is all about power and control. And an abusive relationship, the perpetrator is exerting that power and control. So women and children both need that, you know, to feel that they're back in control of their lives, and to empower them to move forward.
To pick up on where Rebecca stopped, I just want to note in the World Council of Churches, especially through our ecumenical HIV and AIDS initiative and advocacy programs, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, we have different levels of working with persons impacted by sexual and gender-based violence. A lot of our work, of course, came up because of our work with persons who were diagnosed as HIV positive or were actually full-blown HIV AIDS. And what we discovered is that there was need to reorient mindsets. And we have what we call the Transformative Masculinities program, where the aim is to work with men in changing their mindsets. And between the Transformative Masculinities program and Thursdays in Black, we have also started to work in schools to start at the younger ages, primarily among youth. But last year during COVID, one of the things we also started doing was working with the EHIA staff and their counterparts to develop a curriculum to help children to know what their rights are and what is acceptable and manageable behavior. I wouldn't go as far as to say that we have done all that there needs to be done, because for the church, working with the children to prevent sexual and gender-based violence is very new. Years ago, the church was described by one of my classmates, a seminarian studying ministry, as firemen. We go after the fire has taken place and not before. I think these days we are actually trying to be more proactive, especially in the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. The problem is, as I think it was Yolanda who said it, we are on this journey and not everybody is at the same place on the journey. You have people, men and women, who refuse to talk about sexual and gender-based violence. I have women who insist that it is the woman's fault. And then I have the men who are like, just tell me how we can be part of the solution and not the problem. So working with the children is critical because we have also found that, you know, this whole cliche, hurting people hurt people. The thing is, usually the children either become victims themselves or become perpetrators. I won't forget hearing in Jamaica, you don't love me. And she went and she sought counseling. And why did she know the husband didn't love her? Well, my father loved my mother and he used to hit her and you don't hit me, so you don't love me. And she wasn't hit by the man because the man said to her in the long run, in the face of witnesses, honey bunch, if that is what it takes to love you, I will never love you because I cannot hit you. And I want to say to anybody listening right now, if love is going to be defined by abuse and violence, it is not love. And we start with the children, but we have to go everywhere.
Well done. And that would be, sorry, Rebecca, I'm going to give you a minute. I was promising to bring in Natasha for a while now. I suppose after listening to Nikki, in hindsight, I should have probably done this before at the start, but it will be a good time to share the new definition of domestic violence that was implemented as of 2013. And that really shared or more or less encompassed men as being victims, as well as perhaps perpetrators of domestic violence. And so that definition refers to domestic violence as any incident or pattern of controlling, coercive, or threatening behavior, violence, or abuse between those aged 16. So the definition sort of included people who were teenagers, 16 or over, or who have been abused by intimate partners or family members, regardless of their gender or sexuality. So I suppose the powers that be have started on a journey as well to recognize domestic violence in its widest form. Natasha, I'm going to bring you in with your question. Rebecca, I'm coming right back to you. Hold that thought. Natasha?
No worries. This question, well, I guess since Rebecca's waiting, I'll direct it to both Rebecca and then Reverend Nikki. But what could friends and family members do if they suspect that their friend or their family member is a victim of domestic violence? You know, many of us might have seen or maybe witnessed through TV or in personal lives what you think might be a domestic violence situation, but maybe the victim, for lack of a better word, is hesitant to say or is blaming it on something else. You don't want to overstep your bounds, or maybe you think that they are afraid to say it to you, or maybe they are genuinely afraid to say it, but you see it. What would you think that friends and family could do if they suspect that? What would be the best move?
Rebecca?
I think that to kind of start there, I mean, I know I've been in that position, and even as a professional and someone who works with domestic violence every day, the first time I recognized it in sort of a friend or a friend of a friend, I was a bit stumped on, okay, how do I handle this? But I think that the really important thing is that in abusive relationships, the perpetrator will try to isolate the woman, and that will include things like, you know, isolating her from her family and friends. So as a family or a friend, as a family member or a friend, if you are concerned about someone, that you stick by them in terms of, you know, they may say, you know, make plans and then cancel them. They may stop coming over. They may stop calling, but know that that might be due to the abuse that they're suffering. So not to give up on them, to still be there so that when they are ready to talk about it, that you're there. And then secondly, it's about knowing that, you know, abuse, if you've recognized it, you know, again, that the woman may not be ready to acknowledge it or to get help, that it does, you know, that's her personal journey. And so, you know, saying that there is support available, there are, you know, our services, women's aid services are all confidential. We have, you know, various ways that women can talk to us. And one of them is actually, we started a chat line during COVID, because we knew that women were going to be stuck at home with perpetrators, and we knew that they needed a way to talk securely without maybe actually being heard. So that there are many different ways that women can get help, but all of it is confidential. And again, I think what I said before, which is still applicable here, is that, you know, that telling that woman that this is not her fault, because he will tell her over and over again, if you hadn't done X, I wouldn't do Y, you know, that this is your fault. You made me do this. And when a woman is isolated and she's hearing that over and over and over again, eventually she may start to believe that. So as a friend or family member who's on the outside, who's concerned, saying that, you know, no matter what you have done, this isn't your fault, and that there is help.
Right. I'm going to bring the survivor in here. I'm going to bring Precious in. I wonder if she's got any comments. And Nikki, I'm coming right back to you. Precious, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I just want to resound Rebecca's comments earlier about the children are being resilient. The children are really resilient. And you know what? I think my kids definitely forgot the experiences of living in a refuge, and because they make it so nice for the kids, you know. And I think it also depends on the victim, how the rapport he or she has with the children as well. I mean, one of my children went to university, and she's got a good job now, and the other one's in university now. And you know, I've never heard them, barely heard them talk about it as, you know, a bad experience. They remember the refugees, you know, somewhere they played with the kids and stuff. So, you know, there is help out there. And the only thing I'm gonna say, I don't know if you were gonna touch on it, Yolande, but it's the other thing about the police. That is still a touchy subject as well, because the law, the Crown Prosecution Service is, you know, I'm going to put it down to cutbacks in government services, in the civil service and stuff. But unless the perpetrator physically maims you, you really haven't got a leg to stand on. And this is what, although this was a different person, I think I've learned enough of my lessons now to know how to choose next time. But the victim, I'm kind of mixing up my words, the victim is always a victim because you feel as if the law failed you, the justice system fails you. They can't do anything. And the sad part about it is that perpetrators have a way, and they're not only women, you know, they're male as well. There are men who have been abused, let me tell you. But yeah, it's sad. I feel that's the only scar, one of the scars I will carry, is that the law, the justice system failed me, because the time when I went to them and I used the police service, I didn't have a leg to stand on.
Can I come in very quickly here on that point, just on the back of that, Precious? I think you're absolutely right in terms of, you know, and I'm speaking with my legal hat on. For several years, I practiced as a barrister in this area of family, and I guess it was because of my own experiences growing up that I thought I wanted to go into this area. So dealt with cases where there had been domestic violence, and it was all about the protection. I think from the criminal perspective, because of the high criminal standard, unfortunately, they focus on, we need to have the evidence. But the family proceedings, that system, the family court system, is much more I find, accessible in that respect. So, for example, I would have gone and got injunctions for women who didn't have to be, you didn't have to wait to be physically abused. It was enough to have the threats of violence. It was enough to have the intimidation and all of that, where you could go and get an injunction without the other person knowing. So you go to the court and you go on your own, and the judge would look at the situation and grant you that protection for a brief period of time, until then the man has the opportunity to come to court and everybody speaks, and they have their legal representatives. So please bear that in mind, that you don't have to wait until you've been hit, until you've been physically abused. The family court system is there to provide protection to prevent that from happening, and will do that effectively without you having to come face to face with the perpetrator in court to get your protection. So I just wanted to chip that in, because I'm not sure whether we're that
very useful.
Also,
Yes.
Angela, if I can jump in there as well, we do have new legislation in Northern Ireland that I believe is coming into effect in November around coercive control, and that will have much more kind of I don't want to say robust, but it will have much wider offenses of domestic abuse. And so, Precious, what you said before, you're right. Unfortunately, up until now, it has had to be, around physical evidence of what has happened, whether there's damage in the flat or the house, or damage to your, to the woman physically. But now with the new legislation around coercive control, we're hoping that this will make a really big difference. I sat with a woman just the other day who was telling me that she wasn't allowed to leave the house. She wasn't allowed to have friends over. And whilst I was telling her that what was happening was wrong and that it was abusive, I couldn't say it was criminal. But hopefully in a few months' time that it will be, or that it is, because the legislation has passed in Stormont, but it's just a matter of it coming into play. I know as well that they are looking to do a lot more training with the police around coercive control, and that some Women's Aid is looking at doing some of that. And that the police are very keen for that. So again, to educate the officers on what is domestic abuse outside of the physical violence, and how does that look?
Thanks, Rebecca. But before I bring Reverend Nikki in, I'm just going to say here, and perhaps run the risk again of sounding defensive of the systems, but I want to say in terms of our community, perhaps one of the things that many of us rely on here when we're from foreign countries is that there is a different justice system. Perhaps when you come from a country like the Caribbean, where the police don't bother with you at all, and there are very little laws, and men are usually in control, perhaps you feel like you're in a bigger country, a country where domestic violence is recognized more within the law, so to speak. So, Nikki, your comment?
So I was going to point out that we need to remember that domestic violence is about power and the abuse of power. I'm reminding us of that because in the abuse of power, the person abusing the power will sometimes ensure that which they do to hurt the person is not going to be visible to the public. In many cases of physical abuse, it didn't start with the hitting or the punching or the burning or the whatever. It starts with emotional abuse. It starts with the person wearing down the person's mental space so that when they get the blow, they are already prepared and primed to accept it as normative. Now, the word says, and sorry, I'm a pastor, and this is the pastor coming out now. The word says that God created man and woman in God's likeness and image. So what that means is that none is supposed to be over the other. And once we start talking dominion language, you're going to bring out the lion in me and the lioness in both cases. However, to go back to the issue of what we do when we think someone is in a domestic violence situation, I just want to bring up
family and friends you're referring to?
Family and friends. I have a whole list because we had to prepare this right after COVID came out, and we have different categories that we address from the World Council of Churches as how we say people ought to do. But we say, if you think someone is in an unsafe situation, inquire discreetly. You don't know where or how the perpetrator is exercising abuse and authority. Just the other day, the woman got a brand new phone. Oh, honey, I want to make sure that you are all right. She didn't know that the phone was programmed so that everything was recorded to his phone. You cannot therefore just say, I feel you're getting hit. Ask in a very discreet way and identify ways to speak in coded language that it sounds innocuous. I'm always nervous about saying this in public spaces because then when the perpetrator here, guess what happened? They know the trick. We also can engage directly, whether by telephone, internet, or other ways, and establish a trust relationship so the person knows that they can come to you and find help. And I think this is where Precious said that the church was at fault. We did not provide that. I know that there are churches which do. I know there are churches not even interested. Educate yourself as the witness, so to speak, the outside one who wants to help. So just as how Reverend Angela mentioned that she did her own little inquiries, even when Precious said that I asked for a friend, ask for a friend and find out how you might help. And most of all, figure out what can I do to help? Do I have a spare bedroom? Do I have a spare pound, dollar, euro, whatever the currency is? How can I point the person to places where they can find support and help? And if you are in the legal system, help the person to figure out how to get access. Have a code word that you can use with the person, or a code action that, you know, if they scratch the ear or if they do something, you know, that means that something not right. And don't ask the question 50 times knowing that the perpetrator might be new.
Well done. That is a lot to go on.
Yeah.
Natasha?
Yeah, well, following on what Reverend Nikki just said in terms of how friends and family can offer help, just writing on about the theme of help. What barriers, Reverend Nikki, if any, have you faced in terms of when you're trying to actually offer help to a domestic violence victim? And then after, I guess Rebecca can also answer that same question. What sort of barriers do you encounter when you're offering help?
One of the first barriers I have faced is resources. Because I always say to church people, it is easy for me to tell you, Natasha, left the man, come out of the relationship, leave that relationship. It is not safe. If I don't have the resources to help you, if I can't point you to that place of safety, I need to start a journey with you first before I run. The other issue is fear. When Precious said that she had to go back again and again to the abuser, is a serious issue. And some women will tell you, I will not leave him until I am sure I have amassed all it takes for me to stand on my own feet. Because in many instances, and that's why it only took 2 days for her to land in the hospital, worse than she left. In many cases, when they go back, don't the Bible tell you, you know, that when the demon come back in the house, it is coming with 7 friends worse than before. And no, I'm not calling people demons, but the perpetrator is going to be incensed that you dare to leave. And the person who has been victimized knows what they've been through. And the thought of leaving, the thought of doing this on their own without support is hard.
Wow. Rebecca, and then I'm going to bring Precious in. Precious, if you're there. Nikki, I'm going to come back to you because there's a lot we want to talk about, a lot of ground to cover. So Rebecca, over to you.
Sorry, Natasha, can you repeat the question again?
It really was about barriers. I suppose in your work, your line of work, it might be a different set of barriers, but barriers that you face in terms of offering help.
Sure. So I think, some of the barriers that would be faced in terms of offering help, right, for a woman trying to leave a relationship, particularly when she's in a country where maybe she doesn't have family or she doesn't have a support network, that she doesn't have somebody she can turn to, we support women, like I said, Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid has been around for over 40 years and has supported women throughout that time. And we would make sure that no matter, you know, her financial situation, that she is able to access refuge, and that we would use whatever means necessary, whether it's, you know, Red Cross Fund or Be Safe. Within that as well, we would secure interpreters, because language is a barrier. And we know that. And we know that, you know, how difficult it must be for a woman to leave, to go somewhere when language, and to know, you know, what is it that's going to happen? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my children? You know, and so using interpreters, we would use trusted interpreters and appropriate interpreters, because unfortunately that can also be a barrier in that, you know, sometimes there can be inappropriate interpreters who either are connected to the perpetrator or who are maybe, you know, going along with cultural norms. I had a woman one time who told me afterwards that the interpreter said to her, you know, basically, stop talking about this, that's your husband. You know, so it's using appropriate interpreters so that the woman feels safe to be able to talk about, you know, her experience, and also that, you know, what she needs. In terms of, I think, you know, Angela, you touched on it a little bit, the legal system. Again, if you're not from this country, I'm not from this country, you know, there's many of us, it can be hard to know what there is there to help. But there are, you know, there are orders that women can access no matter where they're from. You know, that is something that, you know, they have a right to safety, and that there are legal orders that they can access to help keep them safe, whether that's, you know, a non-molestation order, which means that the perpetrator would have to remain away from her, or whether that's an occupation order where that maybe is getting him out of the house. But no matter what, that there are options here. I think, as I said before, yes, there's a lot of work to do, but there's also a lot of good, and that there is a lot of help, and that reassuring that, you know, that although, yes, cracks in the system are there and we still have that work to do, that overall that the system, you know, if a woman comes to us, you know, we will help her to get access to money. You know, make sure you start at the basic, you know, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you look at her physical needs. You know, does she have, you know, a safe place to live? Does she have food? Does she have clothing? And starting there, and then working from that level up. I think the other thing, just to note really quick as well, that kind of going back to what Reverend Nikki was saying, is that, you know, that when a woman is leaving, it's also the most dangerous time for a woman. And so in terms of family and friends supporting someone, it's about not forcing them to leave, because that person knows the perpetrator the best, and she will know how to keep herself safe. She has been managing this risk. That's, you know, that's one of those fancy terms, but she has been keeping herself safe in this relationship. So telling her you need to do this or you need to do that is not helpful to her. But being there to listen and support her when she is ready to leave, because again, that is the most dangerous time. And when a woman is most likely to be seriously harmed or killed is when she's attempting to leave.
Wow. And may I just quickly say, just to follow on from what Rebecca said there, in terms of getting that help from the legal system, that's not something that you're expected to do on your own. You can walk into any solicitor on the high street that's doing family law, walk in there and tell them what the situation is, and they will do that work for you. There's legal aid available for that, so you don't have to pay for it. So that's accessible to you. Just wanted to chip that in.
Also, Angela, on that note, sorry, and another barrier is immigration, because a lot of women have insecure immigration status because their husband has been or their partner has been controlling their immigration status. So whether that's bringing them in without a visa or without an immigration status, whether that's overstaying it, you know, I've worked with women whose husbands maybe were local and they were, you know, coming to try to apply for a partnership visa, and depending on how the relationship was going, he would revoke that or put it back in. And so that really contributes to a woman being, you know, her immigration status. That's such a big deal. But there is help, Angela. Like, as you said, Angela, there is help. And Women's Aid, we offer a great service, which is starting back up again, called a one-stop shop, and that's where a woman can come. We're going to be delivering it virtually now, as with everything, but where she can access, you know, help. She can speak to a solicitor, she can speak to somebody from benefits, she can speak to someone from housing, and she can speak to somebody from Women's Aid, and that there is help, you know, that she can get an idea of what her options are before she has to make any decisions. And again, the Law Centre in Northern Ireland is great for help as well with immigration issues, and also that there is, within the applications for, you know, remaining in the UK, that there is a domestic violence clause that a woman can access if she's experiencing domestic violence and abuse, that there is a way that she can look to apply to stay in the UK as a victim. Now, it's not the easiest, and there has to be evidence, and, you know, according to the Home Office and things, but that is something that we have used successfully to help women to gain a secure immigration status in our own right.
You've done a lot of my signposting for me, Rebecca. Notwithstanding, we're going to have to do some of it at the end as formality, but I'm going to bring Precious in to talk specifically about barriers. Maybe you've got a comment on barriers that you may have faced, Precious?
Yes, so the greatest barrier, I think, is fear, and there are many factors of fear. Fear of the perpetrator, fear of the unknown when the victim steps out, fear of failure, fear of starting from scratch, from ground zero, fear of people putting you down, like, you know, relatives and so on. So there was a case of in Gloucester, 2014, and the name is Holly Gossard, and she had an injunction and everything, and I believe the police failed her. The guy actually killed her outside her workplace. So you do get these things, but just want to drop in that a woman, and like I said before, you know, male and female, it happens to both. But a woman will leave when she feels the time is right, okay? Because I can't remember the statistics, people go back so many times before they leave for good. And I believe a lot of that is because, you know, they fall through the net that caught them in the first place. One of the things I just want to say is that as a professional, as a working professional, it is, and this is what's happened, I've experienced this as a working professional when I was going through all that, and I kept working because I didn't want to turn to the system again. I kept working, and it wasn't easy. And I work in a profession where you see people in their rawest state, the lowest of the low, and you see people going through the same thing you're going through, and you're working through it. I believe, you know, it is one of the most heart-wrenching, but I will say and encourage anyone who's watching this program, you know, to get help, seek help, get help, and just go for it, because it is worse staying in the situation than not getting help. And I just want to drop this little nugget in that one of the things I've questioned, listen, I'm a firm believer in God. I love my faith. I believe I have a strong faith in God, and I love to go to church. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to bash the church. But one of the things that I questioned about was the scripture that says we should bring in our offering and our tithes, that they will be meat in the storehouse. And many times, even during COVID, where I and myself are asking so many people, where is the storehouse? What happens to what's gone on in the storehouse? I really believe that the issue of DV is one of them, only one that needs to come alive. We need to talk about these things because the church is a hospital, really. It's a community, it's a hospital. And I'm so glad that there is so much work being done now, and people are actually facing up to the fact that families do have issues, whether it be DV or problem with your children or anything like that. So that's my take.
I know Reverend Nikki is raring to tell us how they use their storehouse, but I'm going to give you a chance probably at the end. You've mentioned some of the programs that World Council of Churches have embarked on, and maybe you can tell us about another one specific program that you want to talk about at the end. But I'm playing the devil's advocate here today, and I'm again going to make a comment. Again, forgive me. I know the message is that women should find safe spaces, And the message is for a woman who's facing domestic violence to leave when she's ready. But I have to say, what about those women who never do and feel like perhaps they have forgiven the perpetrator, perhaps the circumstance has changed? What about those women? What would be your message, Reverend Nikki or Rebecca?
And that is one of the issues that I am actually working with my supervisor and a group that I have supporting me here at World Council of Churches recently, because we are arguing that it is time, especially as we prepare for a new season of work, to think about accompaniment of the perpetrator. The one who is doing the wickedness also need help. In fact, they need help more than the rest, more than the others. And by that, I am saying, in one sense, the woman who is in it, the male who is in it, bearing and forgiving and all, they need accompaniment. And in some instances, it may be that it has worked out. I know of the rare case where that has happened, but there are also spaces and cases where they are not facing up to the reality. And the truth is, if that is the case, then we also have to find ways to accompany them. And this business of accompaniment, there is a minister in Jamaica who is on his way out of leadership in the Council for World Mission, Reverend Dr. Colin Cohen, whose PhD thesis was exactly on that, dealing with the issue of reconciliation by accompaniment of the perpetrator and of the victim. If we only deal with the perpetrator, which is how society has dealt with the domestic violence and sexual and gender-based violence, if we're only dealing with the victim, we still have the problem and the problem maker set in their ways and getting worse and worse and feeling that, oh, I'm good, I can get away. It is for us to work on rehabbing, accompanying, working with, walking through the situations with the ones who are perpetrators. Hence, transformative masculinities, working with the children, working with the youth. And I take it a step further to say this. If the perpetrator is of the notion that they can get away with it, that they have the sanction of church, and they use Genesis 3 all the time to justify, because Eve sinned, so we must beat her. If the perpetrator is there, then we have to start further back and help them to understand that it is inhumane, it is sin. And if it is sin and inhumane, guess what? Something needs to change. And just to tell you, Precious, I know you spoke about the churches being wrong, to advise that please remember, Brother Abraham was abusing wife, was abusing Hagar, and probably was abusing others. So we also need to examine the biblical text that we use and show how they need to be reoriented to help people to go forward. Because otherwise, we continue in the violence even without realizing it. And many times, that's what we do, the double violence to the person who has been victimized.
Can I come in quickly on this one, please? From the perspective of, in ministry and how you handle these issues, the issue of, I absolutely agree, you can't just deal with the victim or the survivor. In order to break that cycle, you need to go to where the problem is, where the source is. So it's working alongside. So I've witnessed many situations where people who have experienced domestic violence have found through a process of counseling, working with both parties, have actually been able to go on through that healing process, and the relationship is restored and it's dealt with. So there are success stories, but what's important in all of it is the issue of safety. In the process, there must be safety, whilst you're still working through. And can I just say, in terms of breaking the cycle, I would take it even further back. For women and for men who are listening to this and dealing with these issues, please understand that it begins from a young age.
Yes.
And ideas and notions of what a man should be or what a woman should be.
Exactly.
It begins at that stage. If we can teach our young boys and girls about how they are precious, and how they are valued, and how they are, and what it means to love, and what love doesn't look like, all of these things, it begins from that age. The cycle begins right from there. So for anybody who's a parent, for anybody who's an auntie, who's an uncle, taking responsibility for helping to educate our young people at this tender age, so that they don't grow up into adults who have a warped mentality of what love looks like.
Educate and advocate.
We can talk all day about this topic. It's very emotive. I'm going to give perhaps Rebecca her final comments. But before I do that, Raquel, I know you've got a final question. Natasha, I'm not sure, but we're going to wrap it up very quickly, ladies, very soon. I'm really sorry. And Precious, I'm going to give you an opportunity for your final comments as well. But Raquel, I'm going to begin with you. Your final question.
There are two questions I could ask, but I'm going to go for this one, which is, if a woman does not want to file a police report and they come to the Women's Aid, do you have an obligation to do so? And what can be done to help them in that circumstance?
So we would never require a woman to report the abuse. Obviously, we are bound by issues around child protection. Okay. As well as adult safeguarding. So whilst we would say, you know, we have women who come in and never report what has happened, obviously, if there's an immediate threat to life or if children are immediately in danger, then we have obligations, you know, to safeguard. Or if there is another adult, I think, you know, adult in need of protection is the name, the term now. But if there is someone who is a vulnerable adult, then again, our confidentiality may be limited in that respect. However, we are very upfront with women when they come to us. We very clearly lay that out and say, you know, that this is how we are bound by confidentiality. You know, you can tell us as much as you like, and we're here to listen. But if we know that there's a child in danger, or if you're in immediate danger and there's threat to life, you know, that we would have to follow through with that. Very rarely do we have to break sort of any confidentiality for safeguarding purposes. You know, most of the time we can work with the women where they're at. We work with women from all ages. Angela, touching on what you were saying before about, you know, young people, we do a program called Healthy Relationships that looks at just that, you know, that educating young people, young girls and young men about what is a healthy relationship, because that is so important. You know, that women know that their value and worth and what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, you know, from a young age. That is, you know, that there are programs that we're doing here in Northern Ireland to address that. And again, like I said, Raquel, back to your kind of question, that, you know, we are able to keep confidentiality, and a woman does not need to report to the police. We believe the woman, we're Women's Aid, we come from the side of, we're on the woman's side, and we believe her. And so she's very welcome to come to us with any issues, you know, and know that it would stay between us.
Natasha, final comments or question?
Yeah, the final comment was just going to actually go to Rebecca. It was just to say, if there's a woman watching or listening to this right now who finds herself in the unfortunate position of being a victim of domestic violence, what will be the process, you know, just quite briefly, for her to get some help from yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of ways that women can contact us. Usually women contact us themselves. Sometimes, you know, we've had maybe a health visitor or a social worker make the referral, but often if a woman is experiencing that, you know, she can contact us via email. She can contact us on the phone, or as I said, we started a web chat service. And with any of those, she would have immediate support. We have what is called our referral desk now. So if a woman calls between the hours of 9 and 5, she will have somebody, a support worker, to talk to there and then. Then it depends on what she needs. Again, a lot of women who use the web chat or who use email are just maybe looking to kind of explore their options. But if she needs refuge, we would offer her, you know, refuge. We have 3 refuges in Belfast and Lisburn, but there are 11 refuges across Northern Ireland. If she wants to stay in her home, that's okay too, and we can support her whilst she's at home. We offer floating support or support in the community. We have workers that after she calls, that they would then be, depending on what area she lived in, that she would be referred to a worker, and then they would call her at a time that is convenient to her, at a time that is safe for her to talk, and see what it is that she needs. What does she need help with? What is she looking for? And also be that listening ear and offer emotional support as well. So every woman's journey, every woman is unique, and every woman's journey is unique. And our support is very much tailored to the individual. That we look at, Natasha, if you were to come to us, we would look at you and say, right, what is it that you need right now? And that would be very different than any other woman in our services, that it is very individual, and we support that woman's individual needs.
Angela, final questions or comments?
If I may just ask you, Precious, we can hear that you've come on a journey. I guess you're still on a journey. If you could just maybe help us see what your healing process looked like or is looking like, just to encourage others who are maybe where you were right now.
That's a very good question. I just want to say thank you, though. Big thank you to...
You're very welcome.
To all of you for having me on the program. I thought of it at first, and I usually shy away from stuff, but like this. But I really owe a part of my breakthrough to Women's Aid in Northern Ireland. I really have to give them credit for that. They really have been there for me. They walked me along. And you know what I'm most grateful for the fact that they supported me in such a way that I could keep my job and not just, because for me, I need to be working to feel good about myself. And, so, and that was part of my healing process. For now, I've been to counseling and therapy, and and I've got some really good friends. I think one of the things, people like to talk about their positive side, but I like to talk about my not so positive side as well. One of the things why I suffered so much was because I didn't share with my family, because I know my family would take it the wrong way, and I couldn't live knowing that another human being was harmed because I told my family. But I will do it differently now. I've learned to talk up for myself. I might not deal with a situation when the heat is on, but I will reflect on it, and then I will respond by sending a message to not the perpetrator now, but talking up for myself, rediscovering myself, see where I need help, going on courses. I mean, my job demands that I do, my professional development, but learning the things that, because I wasn't mentored as a child, so I got myself a mentor, and I connected with two of my friends in the Caribbean who were my best friends at school, and they really helped me. I found that I spoke to one of them today actually, I find that I kind of gel with them more, and I feel free to talk about the things that bother me rather than just, sitting there and just not seeking help. So I know where I went wrong, and I think that's a lot of healing there for me. And one more thing, I treat myself to little things and to big things. I started going on holidays. Yeah, started going on holidays, and I'm planning something for when I get old. I've got a little project which is my baby, and I'm working, and I feel good about it. It's a big project, but it's coming along, and I feel good. It's something that I want to do. So there you are.
Congratulations on your journey.
Well done, you.
The final words will belong to Rebecca and Reverend Nikki. You're going to put you on the spot, but we're running out of time. But here's what I want to leave us with. Maybe again, people might say it should have been done at the start. Here are some statistics in Northern Ireland, and this captures quite a lot of the lockdown period. So in the 12 months from the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of December 2020, there were 31,848 domestic abuse incidents recorded by the police in Northern Ireland, and that would have been an increase of 134 on the previous 12 months. The number of domestic abuse crimes, so there's a difference between incidents and that which crosses the threshold into crimes. So the number of domestic abuse crimes recorded by the police reached 19,000, an increase of 951 on the previous 12 months. That's just for thought. We're going to leave that there, and I'm going to come back to Nikki and Rebecca. Generally, at the end, we would ask people, what would you like to raise the volume on? You've raised the volume on a lot today, so I'm going to just ask you, Rebecca, either to dispel any myths about women's aid or your final message, either or. Rebecca, I'm going to go with you first.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that what I would like everyone to be left with is that there's help available, that our support is non-judgmental and it's confidential, and it's meeting, you know, if anybody's experiencing domestic abuse and they come to us, it's meeting you where you're at and what you need, and that we are here for any woman or child experiencing domestic violence and abuse in Northern Ireland, that you have the right to be safe and that we can help you. Everyone has the right to be safe and live a life free from abuse, and that there is help and support available if you are living in a situation that is not safe for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Nikki. Your final words, your message, or dispel any myths.
Thank you so much, Precious, for reminding us that we have an obligation as church. And we, the World Council of Churches, invite each of us to be the difference, the change agent that we want to see. So we invite you to pause, remember or think about the stats you've heard, the persons you know who are or could be victims of sexual and gender-based violence. Post a picture on Thursdays in black, wearing and explaining why you are wearing black. Pledge to be the change agent that this world needs at this time, and pray, because so often we think that prayer can't move mountains, but prayer changes our hearts and sometimes the hearts of others. God works. God also needs us to help God in the work. Precious, you are aptly named for today's program because everyone is precious, and that is what we're about. Ending sexual gender-based violence, one person at a time. Thank you.
Ladies, this was a remarkable dialogue. It was very emotive, at least for me. I want to extend warmest thank you to Precious for braving this storm, for coming and sharing her story. Women's Aid, we applaud you for all the wonderful work, the great work you're doing in Northern Ireland. Women's Council of Churches, we are glad that you're shining a light, being the beacon of hope, whatever you want to call it. Ladies, the Pivot ladies, you have been wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, we thank you for watching Unmute Now. And as usual, we want you to follow us. Raquel is going to be doing the honors today with sharing our social media handles. But keep raising the volume, ladies and gentlemen. Raquel?
Yes, so if you want to, you can get in touch with us on Facebook at Unmute Now, on Instagram at Unmute Now as well. On Twitter, it's at Unmute Now 1, and you can email us at unmutenow1@gmail.com. Of course, you can be in touch through, well, you can listen to our podcast through the platforms, the Apple Podcast, the Google Podcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Breaker, Anchor, and of course, Spotify. So definitely, please stay with us, do this journey with us. We really appreciated you being with us today.
Natasha?
No, and just for signposting, for persons to signpost, I was taking notes. So of course, first of all, the persons here in Northern Ireland, it's 999 for the police, your first touch of contact. Women's Aid, they offer their one-stop shop, but you can also get them online. Of course, there's also Legal Aid and the Law Center. Please also remember you can approach a family lawyer or family court, even if you have not been yet touched physically. And of course, it's always your church as well. For those of you who are listening, we will post those again. For those who are watching us on YouTube, we'll have links at the bottom of the video. Check the comments box and you'll find your links there for all of your signposting.
See why I can't do this alone? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, we say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.